August 28, 2002.
It was a brutal gangland murder in this back alley, and the FBI knew that this man was the killer before it happened. But this man served 30 years in prison for the crime.
See, I never accept what they charged me with, but I had to accept the punishment. And I accepted it. And I done it.
You know, it was so important for the family to stay together, and that meant a lot to me. And my children, he needed it, we needed it.
He was set up to protect the real killers.
Law enforcement that does wrong must be held accountable. They must. This can't go on. They hid behind their badge and done this.
Tonight, the fall guy, betrayed by his own government.
From ABC News, this is Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Back in 1967, 4 men were indicted in a gangland killing. All 4 were found guilty. 3 were sentenced to death. The 4th was sentenced to life in prison. All 4 men were innocent, and the FBI knew it. But the Bureau did nothing because the actual killers were also FBI informants and considered critical to the battle against organized crime. It's the kind of thing you would like to believe could not happen in the United States, but it did. There were no executions. Massachusetts dropped the death penalty in 1974, but 2 of the innocent men died in prison. And each of the other 2 spent over 30 years behind bars. You'll meet one of them and the woman who stood by his side all of those years in a few minutes. But first, a little more background from Nightline correspondent Chris Bury.
On a chilly March day in 1997, Joseph Salvati emerged from this Massachusetts prison after 30 years inside. His life sentence commuted, Salvati had his freedom back, but not his name.
In the eyes of the law, I am still guilty of crimes that sent me to prison. However, I still maintain that I'm innocent, and I promise you that you have not heard the last of my case.
Nearly 4 years later, a judge cleared him of murder and, in this bombshell from the bench, accused the FBI of knowing he was innocent all along.
The FBI had information at the time of the murder, at the time of the investigation of the murder, and at the time of the trial of Mr. Salvati and his co-defendants, that the individuals who were involved in the murder did not include Mr. Salvati.
In March 1965, FBI agents eavesdropped as 2 gangsters asked the local mob boss, Raymond Patriarca, for permission to kill a petty criminal named Edward Deegan. The mob boss agreed, according to this FBI memo detailing the conversation. Raymond Patriarca has put out the word that Edward Teddy Deegan is to be hit and that a dry run has already been made. 2 days later, Deegan was found shot to death in an alleyway. Another FBI memo quoted informants naming the 4 prominent local hoodlums responsible for the killing. But only 2 of the real killers were charged, and 4 innocent men, including Salvati, were convicted of murder, even though the FBI knew they were not guilty.
They let it happen, they knew who had really done it, and then 3 years later they let the wrong guys be indicted. And it was all in the name of going after the mafia.
The real killers protected by the FBI included 2 notorious mob hitmen, Vincent Flemmi and Joseph Barboza. They were crucial in the Bureau's efforts to get mob boss Raymond Patriarca.
You know, I've been termed like a canary, a songbird. Well, I may be all kinds of birds, but, you know, Patriarca is a jailbird today. Understand?
His testimony also sent Salvati, then a local truck driver, to prison. 2 other falsely accused men died serving time. A 4th spent 33 years in prison until his release last year.
It's a tragic case. It's the sort of thing that should never happen in the United States.
Jim Wilson is chief counsel for a House committee investigating the FBI's conduct in the Boston cases. It discovered that Hoover's own creation, the top echelon informant program, routinely protected vicious criminals, including repeat killers, in exchange for inside information.
The Salvati case isn't the only element of what went on in New England. There's a pattern that went for nearly 40 years of government misconduct.
Do you have any remorse?
Remorse for what?
In hearings last year, the former FBI agent responsible for cultivating mob informants in Boston defended the practice.
So you really don't really care much, and you don't really have any remorse. Is that true?
Would you like tears or something? What?
Pardon me?
What do you want, tears?
Joseph Salvati is now suing the FBI for $300 million. In all, the damages sought by those falsely imprisoned and their families exceed $2 billion. The chairman of the House committee investigating all this, Republican Dan Burton, is so outraged he's asked Congress to remove J. Edgar Hoover's name from FBI headquarters. This is Chris Bury for Nightline in Washington.
I'll be talking with Joe and Maria Salvati in just a few minutes, but first I wanted to introduce you to the man who, for the past 25 years, has represented the Salvati family, Joe Salvati in particular. You estimate that you've put in 25,000 hours of your time. Victor Garrow, incidentally, is the man that I'm talking to here. 25,000 hours?
25,000 free hours of my time, because I felt that there was such a great injustice to this family. I thought that it had to be fought, and I have been fighting it for over this period of time.
Was it your idea to sue the government now for $300 million?
We have talked about it. I don't make any decisions by myself. Mr. Salvati and his wife and the kids, we all sit down and talk about the moves that we make.
I know there were a lot of memos that went all the way up to J. Edgar Hoover's desk. Are you convinced, and when I say are you convinced, do you have evidence that Hoover actually knew what was going on?
The evidence shows that J. Edgar Hoover knew everything that was going on in this case. And, in my opinion, he conspired with other FBI agents to murder Joe Salvati. The manner and means to commit that murder was by way of an indictment on October 25th of 1967, wherein the punishment and the penalty at that time was death in the electric chair, and allowing an informant of theirs to commit perjury, and the FBI agents in Boston at that time had evidence to show that Mr. Salvati was innocent of the crime that they were charging him with. And
lest anybody think that you're exaggerating here, in fact, one of 4 men who was in there on a death penalty sentence, right? In other words, one of the 4 men that the FBI knew was innocent of the charges against him.
There were others that were sentenced to death. Mr. Salvati was sentenced to life in prison, but his family, from October 25th of 1967 until July 31st of 1968, when he was found guilty and the jury recommended leniency for him, they thought that their father or their husband was going to die in the electric chair. As a matter of fact, one of the children, on one of the visits to Joe, his youngest daughter, said to him, "Daddy, I hear you're going to get a present. You're going to get the electric chair. Daddy, what does it mean they're going to give you the electric chair? You tell me how anybody with a conscience can allow an 8 or 9-year-old girl to come to her father and say, Daddy, what are you going to get the electric chair? I just don't understand how people can live with their consciences knowing that they're trying and attempting to destroy a family that is supposed to be protected by the Constitution of the United States."
Mr. Garrow, I thank you. We're going to ask you to relinquish your chair when we come back. I'll be here with Joseph and Maria Salvati. And I'm joined now by Joe and Maria Salvati. Thank you for coming. Joe, I want to begin with you, and I'm going to begin, let's get something out of the way. When you were a kid, you were not exactly a model citizen, right?
Oh, yes, I was.
Except for, there was one charge against you, right?
I had a breaking and entering charge about 45 years ago.
When you were 19?
Right.
Other than that, clean record?
That's it.
You were a truck driver?
I drove truck, and I drove a trailer, and I unloaded fish, and I even worked as a doorman for nothing, just for tips. And
how did these guys in the mob come to know you at all? Why did they have any views about you at all, even in terms of setting you up as a victim?
Well, let's see, I borrowed $400 from a Shylock, and things were slow, and I had to pay the bills, so I went to him and borrowed the money.
And you weren't able to pay it back?
And I paid the vigorish every week, and about a month, 2 months later, I needed $2 more, and I went and borrowed $2 more, but Joe Barboza became partners with this fellow that I borrowed the money from. And he was like the enforcer, and he said, yeah, I give him the money. He said, I hope you don't pay.
When one of these wise guys says to you, I hope you don't pay, what is he really telling you?
Well, he's telling you he'd come after you and hurt you.
They hurt you, but it must have come out of the blue. I mean, the way they hurt you, you can't have anticipated that. You can't have expected that.
Of course not. He killed me with his mouth.
Tell me what you mean.
Well, he sentenced me to death. He replaced me with his friend that really committed the crime, because when he was collecting his money, see, just at the time when Barboza was becoming an informant, he sent someone out to collect his money. He had a bat under his arm, and he said, Joe said he wants the money, and he wants it now, and they come after me, and they're going to hurt me, and I went after them and hurt them. I took the bat, and we struggled, and they ran out. And I said, now you can go tell Joe Barboza that he's not getting anything, with a few choice words in it. And he sent word back to us through a lawyer and said, you tell Mr. Joe I'll take good care of him.
And he did, didn't he?
And I said, what the hell can he do to me? I never done nothing with him.
When
but he did.
When the cops first came after you, when they arrested you, what did you think?
I think I was numb. I couldn't talk. The sergeant, I knew him. He said, Joe, he said, can I talk to you? I said, sure. He said, I got a warrant for your arrest. I said, for what? He said, for murder. I got weak. I got numb. I said, come on, you got to be kidding me. Sit down, he said, and read this.
How'd you tell Marie?
I didn't. She found out when she got through work, got through with the children. Someone had told her that your husband just got arrested.
Now, you'd been married for quite a while already at that point, hadn't you, Marie?
Oh, yes, yes.
How many years?
13 years.
13 years.
Yes.
Did it ever occur to you that you might be married to a murderer?
Oh, not in my wildest dreams. Never.
So when you heard this, when I
heard this here, I was shattered. I was devastated. I just couldn't believe it. The children were coming out of school. It was like during the daytime when they picked them up. And it was very hard because we live in a small neighborhood, and it's, you know, you just walk down the street and everybody knows who you are. And this spread like wildfire in the community, you know, that Joe got picked up and was arrested. And no matter who you talk to in the neighborhood, they knew my husband is a good person. It's impossible, can't be, never would hurt anybody. You know, so that's what even made it more like shocking that he would get picked up for something like this.
But this was a nightmare that had to keep getting worse day by day, week by week, because you think, okay, there's been a mistake. They got the wrong guy. They're going to figure it out.
This can't happen.
This can't happen. So then you go to trial, right?
Waited 10 months and then went to trial.
How long did the trial last?
30 some odd days. 30
days. And then you had a jury trial, right?
Mm-hmm.
The jury goes out. How long did it take the jury to come back with a verdict?
Well, they had a verdict within hours.
So when they came back and the judge turns to the foreman of the jury, we've all seen it 100 times, right, in movies, right? Mr. Foreman, Madam Foreman, whoever it is, have you reached a verdict? Do you remember that moment?
Mm-hmm. Very clear.
Describe it for me.
When the jury came back, you know, they all had their heads down. I says, we're in serious trouble here. When they got up and read the verdicts, I had to stand up one at a time and ask us, do you have anything to say? And some said yes. And when he pronounced the death sentence on 4 of them, he said, you're to die in the electric chair with the current running through your body until you are dead on a given date. And he done this like he was enjoying it.
And then they came to you.
And he come to me and said, you have anything to say? I said, no. And he pronounced, he said, I sentence you to the rest of your life, natural life in prison.
And in point of fact, your collective nightmare at that point was just beginning. You had no idea what was still awaiting you, but we're going to try and jam 30 years into 6 or 7 minutes when we come back. We'll be back in a moment. And we're back once again with Joe and Marie Salvati. Joe, as a young man, you had to be a pretty tough guy. I mean, if you would take on some guy from the mob who was coming after you with a baseball bat, but still, on that first day, state prison, federal prison?
State prison.
State prison. How do you survive that? In other words, you're going in there. They have told you you're going to be in there for the rest of your natural life.
Mm-hmm.
And you know something that even Marie doesn't know. She loves you, she believes in you, she trusts you, she cannot believe that you're guilty. But you're the only one on earth who knows, I'm not guilty.
And the people that put me there.
And the people who put you there are not just a bunch of hoodlums, right? Some of them
are law enforcement.
Are law enforcement.
Most of them were.
FBI agents.
Right.
Right? Justice Department.
Justice, FBI.
What are you thinking?
I was thinking, how am I going to do this time? You know, I sat down and I, you know, you hear a lot of stories about how people go nuts, you know, thinking of the time they do. And I said, you know, I'm going to do it either the easy way or the hard way. I done the time, and I didn't let the time do me. And I done
but what does that mean?
I done the time. See, I never accept what they charged me with, but I had to accept the punishment. And I accepted it. And I done it.
How did you grow accustomed to being in prison? Do you ever grow accustomed to that?
You never, you live day to day. You know, you do what you have to do.
What's the worst part about it?
Being in prison, away from your family. You get a visit and you hear, you know, you love your kids and you hug them, and then you have to leave. Get back in your room and you sit down and think.
How often could you see Joe?
Well, I would go up every week.
How far was it from where you lived?
It was a good hour and a half drive, 2-hour drive. And I didn't have a car in the beginning, and I didn't drive. So I would network with somebody that was visiting, and I'd take the 4 kids, you know, and I make sure that he got a visit every week. And then about after a year and a half, 2 years, I got my driver's license, and I got myself a little car. And, you know, I knew we were in for it for the long haul.
Joe, did you ever, were you ever able to talk to some of the other guys who'd been sentenced with you? I mean, they were all innocent too.
They were on death row, and 2 of us got life sentences, so you see them when they went to Mass, and, you know, hello, goodbye, and it's because it's just a walk down the corridor, and they were on death row, you can't go near them.
If anything is worse than what you're going through, it's what those 2 guys are going through. So you actually had gotten a little bit of mercy.
Right.
But these guys, do you have any idea what was going through their heads?
Oh, I could imagine. When I get visits, you know, all I had to do was stall my children. You know, they come up and, Daddy, you're going to come home for this. You're coming home for the birthday. We're having a party, and can you come home? And when are you coming home? And this went on for a year, 2 years, 3 years. And like Victor had told you, my daughter come up once and said, well, gee, Daddy, what's an electric chair? And I said, well, where'd you hear that? He said, the kids in school go by me, they go like this. Zit, zit, Father's got an electric chair. And bang, bang, you know, they're dead. Children are cruel. And that's what you had to live with. And
the 3 of us are going to talk on Up Close, which will be a little bit later this evening, about what you both went through. But I just want to close this part of the conversation, Joe. You're suing the government for $300 million. Does that mean anything to you? I mean, what's the point here? I don't know whether the money is going to make
You're asking me, do I want my children to have the things that I couldn't give them? Yeah. You want my grandchildren to go to school and have things and nice things? Yes, yes. Yeah, I want the money. I deserve it for what they done to my family. Me.
What about punishment? What about a little bit of vengeance here where you say, yeah, I want people to pay for what they did?
Law enforcement that does wrong must be held accountable. They must. This can't go on. They hid behind their badge and done this.
And you know what those guys would say. You know what these guys have said. They said, look,
we done our job.
We done our job. We were after the big guys. We were after the mafioso. And, you know, if a few people, you know, had to do the time, I mean, as one of them, what was it? Rico, is that the guy's name?
Paul Rico.
Paul Rico. He said, what do you want me to do, cry?
Well, that's what he told that. This is the FBI. This is the guy that done all the framing, knew it. And Congressman asked him, do you think, after hearing all this, Joe Salvati's innocent? He said yes. So the congressman kept looking at him. He says, well, I answered your question. He says, I know, but I just want to look at you. He said, how do you live with yourself? How do you go to sleep at night? He says, what do you want? He said, I'll make a good book. This is the FBI, the Justice Department.
All right, we're going to continue our conversation a little bit later this evening on Up Close. We hope you'll join us for that, but I'll be back in a moment.
Coming up on Up Close, I'll have the rest of my interview with Joe and Marie Salvati.
How long has it been since you cried, Joe?
I cry every day.
And that's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. I hope to see you shortly on Up Close.